In this lesson, we'll continue our work with functions and graphs. In particular, remember that in our previous lesson, we graphed the quadratic function f of x equals 3x squared minus 12x plus 17. And we did this by completing the square. We obtained the expression 3x minus 2 quantity squared plus 5. Now let's think about why completing the square was useful here. So the first thing we observed is that this expression 3x minus 2 quantity squared, well, anything squared is always greater than or equal to 0, and the number 3 is positive, so this entire expression is always greater than or equal to 0, which means our entire function f of x is always greater than or equal to 5. In other words, we're taking a quantity that's always greater than or equal to 0 and we add 5. So the minimum value that this function can take is y equals 5. And what value of x will produce that y value? Well, that's precisely when the quantity we're squaring is equal to 0. So when x minus 2 is equal to 0 or x is equal to 2. So this point 2 comma 5 is an important point that we call the vertex of our parabola. So in particular, the vertex of the parabola or the quadratic function y equals a x minus h quantity squared plus k is this point h comma k. So here we had an h of 2 and a k of 5. So our vertex is this point 2 comma 5. And again, you can always reason through for yourself what the vertex is going to be. So it will either be, in this case, the minimum point of our parabola because this a value was positive, meaning that this entire first quantity is always positive. So when your a value is positive, your parabola will open up, and so your vertex will be your minimum point. If your a value is negative, so if we'd had, for example, a negative 3 here, then this entire quantity would always be negative, in which case we would have a maximum value. So let's take a look at an example of a situation like that. But again, what we want to emphasize here is that we can find the vertex of our parabola by completing the square. We can determine if our parabola opens up or down by the sign of this first number a, and we can sketch the shape of our quadratic function by finding our vertex and then plotting a few representative points on our parabola by plugging in values for x. So let's take a look at another example. Here I have the function f of x equals negative 2x squared minus 4x plus 5. And I'll leave it to you to pause this video, go ahead and complete the square. When you do that, you're going to get negative 2x plus 1 squared plus 7. So let's first figure out what our vertex is going to be. So again, I'll forget about the minus 2 for a moment. Let's just look at this quantity x plus 1 quantity squared. That quantity is always greater than or equal to 0 because it's an expression squared. It will equal 0 when x is equal to negative 1. So when x equals negative 1 is the x value of our vertex. So our vertex will be negative 1, comma, and then when x is negative 1, we get 7. So the vertex of this parabola is going to be negative 1, 7. And now I notice that the quantity negative 2 times x plus 1 squared, well, negative 2, that's definitely a negative number, times x plus 1 squared is a positive quantity, so this expression is always less than or equal to 0. Meaning the largest it will ever be is 0, meaning the largest value our function will ever take is 7. So minus 1 comma 7 will be the maximum value of our parabola. So let's use this information to go ahead and sketch our graph. So again, I'll go ahead and plot our vertex, negative 1, 7. We know that our parabola will open down because we figured out that negative 1, 7 is a maximum point. An easy value of x to plug in again is x equals 0. We see that when x is 0, y is 5. I'll plug in a point on the other side of our vertex, so I'll plug in x equals negative 2. When x is negative 2, we again get f of x or y is equal to 5. And we can now use this information to sketch the graph of our parabola. So again, the important takeaways from this video are that we can sketch the graph of a quadratic function by completing the square to obtain the form y equals a x minus h squared plus k. From there we can determine our vertex and whether our parabola opens up or down, and we can sketch additional points on the parabola to get our general shape.